We're entering the first gallery of the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum, and this is a gallery that's really significant to us, primarily because we have so many visitors who come from out of town as far away as Europe and Asia, and they come to see flowers like this lily, calla lily, turned away from 1923. And what people identify with O'Keeffe and the flowers is her fame and her as an artist, as a painter of flowers. But in fact, that's a very small bit of her total lifetime production as an artist. You can see in most of these paintings, she has many more interests, the composition, the color, the form, than she does the flower itself. And yet we find that people come here for the flowers, and so in this gallery we have many flowers to greet them. And then we try to reach them through her watercolors, her landscapes, and other paintings that we own, because we know that the longest running theme in her artwork is actually abstraction, not flowers. This gallery is the opening to Georgia O'Keeffe and the Far Away, Nature and Image. And it's really about Georgia O'Keeffe and the outdoors and how compelling the outdoors was to her and how she came to paint and eventually live in New Mexico is part of this story. Right away here in the gallery is Gerald's Tree from 1937. And by this time, Georgia O'Keeffe had really come to understand the New Mexico landscape. She was electrified by the colors of the land, the rocky outcroppings. And you can see in this, the greens, a little bit of green, but what you really are seeing is red and then purples. So her early years here in the early 30s was trying to get a hold of those colors. So in this landscape, I think, is an identity that evolves into these wonderful paintings of the landscape and the bones and the ruggedness of the land. But what fascinates me more is how rugged she was, even in a place close to her home, because this painting was created on the back seat inside a Model A Ford that she owned, that she referred to as her favorite studio. So she would remove the driver's seat, then she would unbolt the passenger car, turn it around facing the back seat, and then she would lay the canvas on the back seat as an easel and paint inside of her Model A Ford. And she did that because at the end of the day, in the summer, when she would be painting at the Ghost Ranch, it becomes hotter and hotter as the day goes on, and other animals become a problem. And not large animals. Bees were actually one of the difficulties of painting in this landscape. So the bees would find her. So she would first move inside the car, and as the bees would come, eventually she would roll up the windows and continue painting as long as she possibly could. And then when it got too stifling, she would finally give up painting altogether. She lived at the Ghost Ranch from the summer through into the fall, because that's when the colors are most alive there. And yet that becomes the hardest part of the year for any human being to be in that environment, because the temperatures are so hot. So she had a practice, a drawing practice, a daily practice of painting and drawing. And she would go out into the landscape, she would go to rodeos, she went to Pueblo dances, she was having an incredible exotic experience for someone in 1929 in New Mexico. And by coming to someplace so iconically American, the Southwest, by focusing on the native culture, the Hispanic culture, and the landscape, she really created something that was so clearly American and yet modern. Abstractions are really the through line for Georgia O'Keeffe. It is the practice of her early life and continues right through to the end. Her last works are complete abstractions. They're beautiful works that are simply forms and fluid lines that she found in nature all of her life and then reproduced into her artwork. This painting, The Black Place, Gray and Pink from 1949, we're looking at the accumulated experience of more than a decade of Georgia O'Keeffe's love of a particular environment on the west side of New Mexico. in a particularly harsh landscape. And when she first went out there in 1936, she mapped the landscape. She drew in the horizon line. She drew in the bushes that appeared at the low-lying area. But by 1949, you can see that her abstract desire expresses itself in a way that we have no horizon line, we have nothing growing here, and we're completely lost in this environment. And if I were to just walk up and tell you this was a landscape, it would be hard to imagine that. She took a tighter and tighter focus until we're lost completely in her own world, and we have simply composition, color, and form. We located the exact site where Georgia O'Keeffe traveled to paint in the 1930s and 40s at a site on the west side of New Mexico that she called the Black Place. She created 24 landscapes from this. This is Georgia O'Keeffe's camping equipment, which was owned by Maria Chabot, her young assistant, and the two women would travel. They set up tents, but it wasn't a tent, it was tarps, and they would rig a form and then lay out the tarps. She describes one day that she painted with her gloves on because it was so cold. There's another letter that describes a rainstorm in the night that brought their tent down, in which they had to decamp in rain suddenly to the car and driving back home again. So she was a rugged woman committed to a particular place, and it was a harsh place, but her will matched the grandeur of the place in the amount of preparation it took to go out to this site. This gallery contains photographs from the museum's collection of Georgia O'Keeffe. She was one of the most photographed women of the 20th century, and it began very early in her relationship with Alfred Stieglitz, the great modernist photographer, who eventually became her husband in 1924. This photograph from 1918 is emblematic of how that photographic project got started, and it was his project, a conceptual project that he always wanted to pursue, to photograph a portrait that would be a composite made up of a single body photographed over time, but also fragmented images of that body. And the young Georgia O'Keeffe became the subject of that photographic project. And here we see the interaction of, she is a highly stylized young woman. She's in a hat, she's buttoning her coat in just so manner, and you see an artwork behind her. And so her identity in the project becomes joined to her artwork. After Alfred Stieglitz died, Georgia O'Keeffe moved to New Mexico full-time. The photographic project did not end with Stieglitz's death. Many photographers of the 20th century came to find her in the landscape, in her home, and she was, as you might imagine, a very knowledgeable model for that photography. We conclude the show Far Away here in a gallery of photographs created by the famous landscape photographer Todd Webb, who was a really good friend of Georgia O'Keeffe's. So this series of photographs come from a photo album Webb sent to O'Keeffe after they took a 10-day raft trip down the Colorado River when she was 74 years old. And it shows this amazing rugged woman and her interest in the outdoors. This to me looks like at the end of a day. She looks a little tired, and rafting for a day can be tiring work. But here she is in the raft still. They're just about to get out of the raft. She's in a dress. It's an iconic dress from her collection, something she liked so much. She had 3 or 4 of these made over her lifetime. She was at an age that you might think that comfort would be top on her mind, and yet we see her at work on the raft trip. Here is a picture by Todd Webb. Again, focus on those hands. These are the hands as a young woman that so fascinated Stieglitz. And Todd Webb knew Stieglitz, he knows that whole body of work, and he captures O'Keeffe at work with those hands pulling an oar on a raft trip. Georgia O'Keeffe was really the first well-known woman artist, and even well into her life in the 1970s, there was no one who could match her fame. So she lights up our imagination as an artist because she was famous so young and so famous so young. But secondly, she lived the life she wanted to live, and she was a very disciplined woman. And I think that stands out as women made choices, even right through to the 70s. They made choices that accommodate family and other pursuits in their life. Georgia O'Keeffe had one driving passion in her life, and it was her art.